Good day, everyone, and welcome to our Smart Webinar series and today's webinar, Lower Turnover Through Employee Engagement. Today's webinar presentation will be 45 minutes, followed by a live Q&A session. So now I'd like to introduce our presenters. First is Michelle Holleran. Michelle Holleran founded Holleran Consulting, also known as Holleran, in 1992. She was inspired by her belief that customer engagement and satisfaction are the primary drivers of quality improvement. She introduced these concepts to not-for-profit senior living providers over 2 decades ago. Since beginning Holleran, resident employee engagement and satisfaction measurement and best practice development have become standards for the field. Today, the Holleran database of engagement and satisfaction scores is the largest CCRC database in the world, with benchmarks that allow CCRCs to compare against the most innovative senior living providers in the country. So welcome, Michelle. We also have with us today Andrea Coleman. Andrea Coleman is the Director of Human Resources at Maplewood Park Place since 2005. Prior to joining Maplewood Park Place, Andrea worked 11 years for Marriott International in various capacities, mainly in the field of human resources. Her last role with Marriott was the Director of Personnel Services at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. Andrea attained her bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Maryland, College Park, Maryland, and her master's degree in industrial organizational psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. She oversees the people functions in the community. Andrea supervises and provides consultation to management on strategic staffing plans, compensation, benefits, training and development, budget, and labor relations. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you, Andrea.
So first, Michelle, can you just tell us a little bit about Holleran and why is employee engagement important?
I'd be delighted. Thank you. Good morning, Andrea and Andrea. I guess it's the afternoon for some of us. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today, and I'm so excited for all of us to hear on the call a little later best practices from Maplewood Park Place, which is a Sunrise living community based in Maryland. Holleran began, as you mentioned earlier, Andrea, about 25 years ago, measuring stakeholder opinion, and that would include employees, residents, and family members associated with some of the largest senior living communities in the world. Our database includes more than 1,000 senior living provider communities across the United States and Canada, with over 60,000 employee cases. Our benchmark is the most robust in the field, and as a group, we at Holleran are very passionate about the subject of engagement. And our mission is to help bring insight, not just numbers, but meaning, so that providers can use the results effectively to implement culture change, whatever that looks like on their campuses. Why is employee engagement important? Well, many reasons, but I think the first one is that workforce stability is the #1 concern of most senior living organizations today. And we can blame the 3-legged stool of low wages, stiff competition, and grueling work demands for that. But employee engagement correlates strongly with important business outcomes such as productivity, better safety, resident satisfaction, and very importantly in this day and age, turnover. So let me talk a little bit about turnover and its relationship to engagement. I want to show you a chart here that we use to indicate what the national numbers are for senior living employees across the United States. This is the national benchmark that we've created, and we use 15 factors to create this index and then aggregate it for all the communities in our benchmark. We like to call these zones the orange zone, the blue zone, and the green zone, even though there's 5 distinct categories. And what this allows us to do is really see how engaged employees are. We like to look at the orange zone as those who are considered advocates and catalysts for the organization. These are the most highly engaged employees, and together they represent about 44.7% nationally of the employees in the database. These orange zoners care not only about their own personal fulfillment at work, but they're also very invested in the overall success of their organizations. They work outside the boundaries of their job descriptions, and they take personal pride in the contributions they make. Now, why are these folks so important to turnover specifically? Well, orange zoners are 3 times less likely to leave organizations than the other 3 categories you see there. And that's important because this type of stability supports culture change. Without a critical mass of folks in the orange zone, you won't be able to have any kind of culture change going on, whether that's hospitality programs or wellness initiatives or innovations like the greenhouse model or other types of innovations that we want to forward in our field. The blue zone folks are next in our categorization, and these comprise the endorsers and contributors. The blue zone employees are often good hard workers, but they are much more likely to leave the organization, and they see work less as a calling and more of just a job. And then you'll go to the green zone on this chart, and you'll see that 23.6% of those in our database are considered resistors. This is our problem area in senior living. Some resistors are toxic. Some quit and stay. Many are invisible and aren't very productive. And the problem with the resistor category is that they eat away at the organization's soul, and they affect the good morale of other employees. I really don't believe you can move an organization forward with a large number of resistors on board. These are also folks who turn over sometimes voluntarily and sometimes involuntarily. But we need to get our resistor group much lower than this. And the goal would, of course, be to get the orange zone much higher than this.
So, Michelle, besides focusing on overall employee engagement, more specifically, what should organizations be focusing on?
Well, I believe, first of all, we need to look at turnover, as I mentioned. Holleran has done extensive research with organizations to look at the relationship between turnover and these other 3 factors. How engaged are your supervisors? How engaged is your overall campus? And what's the overall satisfaction level of your employees? And the important takeaway from this chart is that there's a direct inverse relationship between turnover and the other 3 factors. So you see that as those factors of engaged supervisors and engaged campus and overall satisfaction go up, the turnover goes down, and vice versa. I think that's an important thing to look at. The second thing is represented by this chart that we've developed showing the Maslow hierarchy of needs that depicts the relationship between satisfaction and engagement. It's important to understand that satisfaction is still important to measure. And so satisfaction is something we need to continue to keep our eyes on. Why does satisfaction relate to engagement? Well, basically, if you look at this Maslow's hierarchy, you can see that satisfaction is represented on the most basic need level of any human being. And so it is with employee engagement. Employees need to be feeling safe in their work environment. They also need to have their physiological needs met. An example of these basic needs would be the physical safety of employees being protected and being paid a competitive wage. As we go up the ladder of the hierarchy, you can see that very different things are being measured by engagement, such as belonging needs, esteem needs, and self-actualization needs. These are represented by questions such as, I have friends at work. I often leave work feeling good about the work I did. I feel personally that I make a difference here. Those are what we're really trying to attain to get people into the orange zones of our organizations. However, if the satisfaction factors aren't met, then you have no hope of really engaging employees. So I think that looking at satisfaction factors is another thing we should focus on. A third aspect to be focused on is to recognize that the frontline supervisors are key to engagement. The Holleran database, for instance, shows, as represented on this chart, that 60% of our supervisors are highly engaged, and that compares to 44% of the overall employee non-supervisor population. But if you look at the blue zone and the green zone, you'll see that we still have supervisors who are only partially engaged, as represented in the blue zone at 28%, and actually disengaged in the green zone at 12%. Now, the good news is that in corporate America, these numbers of blue zoners and green zoners is much higher, according to Gallup. So that's the good news. But the bottom line is, we still got 40% of our supervisors who are not really engaged. Now let's look at generational engagement. Generational engagement is also an interesting thing to look at. As we see from this chart, the number of fully engaged employees in senior living differs by generation. On the bottom of the chart, you'll see Generation Y. Those are your millennials, born in 1977 to 1993. Generation X is to the left. 1965 to 76 is when those folks were born. And then the baby boomer generation, born in 1946 to 64. Now, if you look at the orange graph here, the chart will show you that there's a 12% differentiation between the orange zone numbers of millennials versus baby boomers. And this is really interesting to look at. I believe it's because more boomers are supervisors, and we know statistically that boomers are more committed if they're supervisors. Millennials are driven by purpose and meaning, and we can get them to an engaged point if we emphasize our missions and we connect individual roles to that mission. But this is something that the supervisors need to really emphasize. Boomers are good at prioritizing, and millennials need to be taught this skill. They seek and crave accountability. So I think the bottom line is that we can really get these numbers up for our Generation Y millennials if we put in practice some things like emphasizing our mission, teaching them skills such as prioritization. And we have to remember that even though this number of millennials looks relatively low compared to the Generation X and baby boomers in senior living, it's quite favorable compared to corporate America, where only 29% of the millennials are highly engaged. By 2025, millennials will make up an estimated 75% of the workplace. We need to give them a reason to stay long-term with us. Now, I know it's a popular idea that these millennials are job hoppers, but actually only 42% of them have that propensity. 58% of them want to stay long-term in an organization. And so this is a real opportunity that we should stay focused on. How do we get those millennials to stay with us long-term? As we look at generations, we also need to look at departments. And we need to focus on those who are less engaged, the nursing health services folks and the dining services. You can see they're represented on the right-hand side of the chart. The turnover is most acute among these two departments. 40% is typical. And the causes of disengagement among these two groups, the nursing and health services as well as the dining services, is largely because of the high physical demands of the work and that many are low-paying jobs. There's lots of financial stress on these employees. The other thing is research that we have done shows that they are not feeling that their opinions count, and they don't necessarily see a long-term future or career path in aging services. The key here is to train supervisors in these departments to engage their direct reports. These supervisors are often extremely technically competent, but they have received very little leadership development. And so by training the supervisors to engage the workers in these departments, we're going to have a lot more success. We know, Andrea, that 60% of an employee's engagement results from their relationship with their supervisor. And if your boss is not engaged, there's only a very remote chance that your direct reports are going to be engaged. So engaging the supervisors first of these two departments and teaching them how to engage their coworkers is really key. And then finally, I would say engagement by length of employment is important to look at. The honeymoon period is when employees feel the most engaged, as indicated by this chart. You can see the orange zone is highest at 51% during the first year of employment, and then it steadily goes down to 42% during year 2, and it pretty much stays there. What can we do to keep the honeymoon period alive? Well, get them involved with residents as soon as possible. Work on a better onboarding process. Pair people with mentors right away. And surprisingly, encourage friendships. Find ways to bring fun to work. Check in regularly using one-to-one conversations and recognize them and get to know their personal needs. Career ladder them early and conduct stay interviews on a regular basis, not just at a yearly performance evaluation. These folks who are in their first year also appreciate reverse mentoring, meaning that they have skills to share as well, and reinforce the mission once again and teach them how their individual role connects to the overall mission of the organization. The insights to be gleaned by slicing and dicing engagement data are huge. We not only provide meaning behind these numbers and the data, but we offer strategies for improving your engagement scores, and that can't be emphasized enough. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. Breaking down the data that way gives providers a real insight into their associates and especially how they can improve their engagement. So it's very valuable. So Andrea, can you tell us a little bit about Maplewood Park Place?
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. Good afternoon, everyone. Maplewood Park Place is a continuing care retirement community, and we are located in Bethesda, Maryland. And Bethesda, Maryland is an affluent urban community in Montgomery County, Maryland. As a CCRC, we are uniquely structured as a cooperative with two corporations. We have 207 independent living apartments, and the community is supported by staff in healthcare, dining services. We have housekeeping and laundry, maintenance, which is the engineering crew. We also have a recreation team, transportation, concierge, and a security group. One strong belief of our strategic plan is that we are capable of being the employer of choice in the area. We have an average of 180 team members, and these team members are from over 30 different countries. Our team members come to us from the surrounding area, mainly Prince George's and Montgomery County, but we have some who travel outside of the District of Columbia and a couple from Virginia. Our turnover averages around 23.19%, and that was our actual number in January also. And that's versus a company, and I might say also industry average of around 43%. We have been the recipients of the Best of Bethesda for Senior Living Services Award for the past 8 years, and for that we're extremely proud. And in 2017, we were awarded the Malcolm Baldrige Silver Award for Quality Standards.
That's very impressive. Can we take a look at your team member engagement results? All right.
Yes.
So, wow, this is amazing. You guys are at the top of the holler national benchmark. That's impressive.
Thank you.
What do you contribute to accomplishing that?
So here we are. We are looking at Maplewood Park Place's team member engagement results, and this is our actual results from 2017. And we're looking at another illustration of the engagement index that Michelle introduced to us early on. If you do the quick math, we'll see that about 65% of our team members are in the orange zone. And we want our orange zone numbers to be much bigger than the blue and the green zone. These orange zone team members function as our rowers of our boat. So they're the ones who are at the front of our boat, taking Maplewood Park Place along, to our destination of being the best of Bethesda. If we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs that Michelle spoke about, we can see a correlation between our employee engagement scores, and we look at having a friend at work, for example. Michelle spoke about that. Talk about the employee's sense of belonging, having a friend at work. We had 86.4% of our team members score as agreeing with that or strongly agreeing. So that's a lot of team members that strongly agree that they have a friend at work, which means they're speaking to their sense of belonging. If we also take a quick look at our connected to their self-esteem, again, thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you look at the question of, I often leave work feeling good about the work I did, we had a whopping 95.6% of our team members agree or strongly agree with that statement. And then lastly, looking at the question, I feel I personally make a difference here, which adds to employees' self-actualization. 90.6% of our team members rated us as agreeing or strongly agreeing with that statement. So now we can move on to the next slide. And as we move on to this slide, we will share our best practices. And we have a couple highlighted here, but I'll mention a couple others. Number one is our open door policy. This is encouraged. We have a daily standout during which our executive director talks about what's supposed to happen in the community for that day. And also other department managers and team members participate actively. We use this to foster an environment of timely open communication and encourage transparency, active participation from all levels. And this is also encouraged through skip-level meetings. Another best practice of ours is that we host a lunch with the executive director and the HR director, myself. So myself and the executive director, we have a lunch in which we invite team members. We invite 8 team members each month to attend. but we always try to mix the group up. We will have newer team members come and mixed in with more tenured team members. Another skip level meeting we have is what we call our advisory council. And this council is comprised of frontline team members, and they function as departmental ambassadors. So they come to the meeting representing their full group. Another best practice is we publicly recognize team members. We have a program called Team Member of the Month, which isn't isolated to Maplewood Park Place. I'm sure other companies have such a program, probably called Employee of the Month. But we also recognize a supervisor and a manager of the quarter. And these programs are also in place year-end, where we have a overall team member, supervisor, and manager of the year. The outstanding team members pick is displayed along with the letter that's written on their behalf. And it's very important to us that not only team members know who these awardees are, but that our residents know also. So what we've done is we have a plaque in the resident area. We actually have a couple plaques in the resident area where we display the name and the pick of the team member who is being recognized. So this alerts residents and team members to what's going on, and they can also have the opportunity to congratulate the awardees. Another program is called Eurostar. And the Eurostar program requires team member participation from all levels. So we write a recognition card for any team member who we believe displays the attributes that we want to encourage. And when it's written by an hourly team member, it's usually along the lines of those who are extremely helpful to them inside or outside of their respective departments. And on average, we get about 25 of those cards per month. When we talk about our performance evaluation, our managers fully understand that it's important to complete evaluations timely and that ongoing conversations are important to encourage the behaviors you're looking for. So we trend at least 90% each month in employee evaluations being done timely. With that, we encourage team members' growth, and it's supported by a formal cross-utilization program, which resulted in 24 promotions over the past 3 years. And this is supported also with a compensation plan, and we use an annual wage survey, wage analysis, to make sure that our wages are still in line with our compensation strategy. Along with the usual policies and procedures, Maplewood also has 22 basics, and these provide us with actionable guidelines, and this is ingrained in our culture. So we use these basics to form our relationships with residents and also with our fellow team members. Another best practice is we know everyone likes being recognized, but what we do is we try to take it a step further, and we'll send a friendly letter home during our annual employee recognition time frame. We send the letter home and alerting the team member that they're a nominee and that we would like them to attend the banquet or lunch, whatever we have planned that year to distribute awards. But in sending the letter home, they get to talk real time with their family and share with them their accomplishment, because even if they're not a winner in the end, they're a winner because they were nominated for such an accolade. We also send the birthday cards home to our team members. One other item that we do, and team members really like it, is that instead of flowers, we opt to present our new moms and dads with a personalized baby blanket. And this baby blanket has the name of their newborn along with the newborn's date of birth printed on it. And when we have the unfortunate loss of a team member's family member, an immediate family member, we gift that team member a memory box. And it's just like the name suggests. They can store pics, whatever memorabilia they have of their family member, they can store in that box. But one thing I really like about the gift, and that a lot of team members find value in, are the poems. There are tons of poems and words of encouragement in the box in the form of a book that helps the team member with coping. And one last best practice I'll mention is, and I think this is even more relevant than everything else that we do, but it's continuous training. We train at hire, we retrain if needed, but consistently every month we have an all team member meeting, and we have different presenters, different facilitators across different departments on pre-identified topics, and they talk about this during the team member town hall meetings. And it's very interactive. We solicit participation from team members in the audience, and sometimes the managers have team members, employees in their direct department help with that training. And what this does is a couple of things. The audience gets to hear from fellow team members, and also the team member that's presenting gets to develop their skills, especially if it's a team member who has expressed an interest in becoming a supervisor or a manager. So those are some of the things that we do here and we find value in, and our team members have expressed that they like those programs also, and they seem to work really well for us.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andrea, for sharing your best practices. They're very personable and authentic, which I think is why you're getting such great scores. So we appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Michelle, from a national perspective, which best practices do you recommend that will impact turnover and increase employee engagement?
Well, we'll go through these pretty quickly, but the first thing is to measure engagement regularly. Believe it or not, Andrea, 71% of the organizations that regularly measure engagement see their scores go up and their voluntary turnover go down. And I think that is because what we look at and what we focus on, what we measure, actually gets acted upon. So campuses should be measuring employee engagement at least once a year to get a baseline, and to use a tool that not only gives overall results, but gives results by department, so that those department managers can actually look at their results. And I would also say that resurveying as often as possible. At Holleran, many of our clients use pulse surveys. We, in addition to asking the 15 questions on the index, can cherry pick out some of the ones that maybe were the lower scorers and reassess those regularly throughout the year. That's very, very helpful to see whether or not your scores are going up. Now, the second thing I would say is we need to use the data then to develop your supervisor leaders. As Andrea mentioned, training is extremely important. And many of our supervisors have not learned how to engage employees. That's not part of the curriculum that they learned in school. And so we've developed something called the Holleran Leadership Program that looks at leadership engagement from the inside out. And what we do is utilize in this program a combination of not only techniques to engage employees and to teach those techniques and to get the supervisors to practice those techniques on a regular basis throughout the program, but we also give them feedback. We ask them to use a 360-degree leadership engagement assessment tool that tells them how engaged other people see them at work. And they can also evaluate their own level of engagement according to what they believe and compare the two to see what kind of gaps exist. So that's one piece of information or data that you would use to develop your supervisor leaders. Another one would be the team results from your own department, and to track that on a regular basis, as I said, and then to look at the overall organizational results. And I would say that this is really important to share with all employees so that they can see by category the engaged employees, the somewhat engaged employees, and then the number of disengaged employees for the overall organization. The next thing I would say is to create goals and accountabilities for each department. Not just goals dealing with budget targets and financials and project completion, but goals that are softer measures like engagement, because this translates into hard measures like turnover. Now, we know from our research at Holleran that for every 10% increase in orange zoners in your department, your voluntary turnover will go down an average of 8.2%. So it's important to know how many are in each zone. It's also important to track turnover by department. SLS has an excellent piece in their most recent newsletter, Andrea, I noticed, on calculating turnover. And to do this by department and to contrast engagement scores is really, really important to do as well. I will make one note about turnover, and that is sometimes it needs to go down before it goes up. And that's because we need to manage in our field the number of green zoners and purposefully and intentionally reduce that number. You saw that Maplewood Park Place was in the 7% range compared to the average in our database, which is much higher. It's 1 in 5. So getting that down and comparing turnover rates would be something that I would advise is the best practice and something really important to do. Now, the next thing that we see nationally is to work with HR to transition out those resistors. In my view, I see organizations tolerate disengaged employees a lot more than they should. Now, sometimes people have individual circumstances, and we need to be cognizant of this, that really get in their way of being engaged at work. But generally speaking, once a resistor, always a resistor. And the problem with a resistor in a department is that they affect the morale of others. And I really feel that in our field, we need to get tougher about this. And I know we are very benevolent in the way we treat employees in senior living, and I think in general, that is the reason why our engagement is so much higher than in other fields. But I also think it breeds more tolerance, and we tend to spend a lot of time on the squeaky wheels. And that's exhausting for supervisors, that's exhausting for the organization, that's exhausting for other employees to have to deal with all that baggage. The other technique that we're seeing a lot is the conducting of stay interviews. These are interviews that ask questions like, what do you most like about working here? What talents would you like to contribute that you're not currently contributing? What can I do as your supervisor to support you? What can we do to build more trust within our department? What are your long-range career goals? Questions like these are reasons to help people really feel connected. And so we need to make sure that we identify our catalysts and advocates in each department and interview them on a regular basis to find out why they're staying and what their needs are. And then, of course, the other technique is feedback loops. It's very related to this. And feedback loops are regular one-to-one check-ins instead of just a yearly performance review. Rounding has become very popular, and asking open-ended questions of people so that you'll learn a lot more. Doing those pulse surveys on a regular basis so that you can track and give feedback to people. Open door policies, which I believe Andrea mentioned. Encouraging crucial conversations. Allowing people to have real dialogue with one another. Encouraging our supervisors to listen more than they talk. To conduct stand-ups, which is very popular these days, and discovery sessions, as well as learning circles. So it's important that we continue to keep this dialogue open between supervisors and employees so that we're really hearing what is engaging to employees. And then finally, obviously, reward and recognize your top performers. Over 70% of the employees in the Holleran database say that their supervisor recognizes their work in a positive manner. And that is a really positive finding. We need to keep up that really good work. We need to find out, moreover, how people appreciate being recognized and rewarded and customize that approach to their needs. One size does not fit all. We need to be specific when we recognize people. We, for instance, could say something like, I like how you supported Greg yesterday by affirming his contribution to the EMR project. But to be specific and not generic in our feedback. When employees are recognized, they are 35% on average more likely to say that their organization is the best place to work, that the culture of the campus is fun and enjoyable, and that my company cares about me as a person. Andrea, that's all I have for today.
That's plenty. We heard some great best practices from Andrea and Michelle, and I'm guessing if providers picked even just one to focus on, it would make a significant impact. So thank you both for sharing. So right now we're going to go to our Q&A session. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them into the question pane on your panel. We've got a few questions here. First one is, I've read somewhere that all it takes to engage employees is to reward and recognize more. Is there more to engagement than that or not?
Well, that's a very important component, there's no doubt. But I think what we have to do is recognize that engagement is a pretty complex piece of work. It's not just one thing, it's many things. So we have to hit it at many levels. And if you'll recall that concentric circle, the first thing we have to do is teach employees who are supervisors how to engage themselves. And that's a focus of our Holleran Leadership Engagement Program, to really spend some time helping supervisors become more passionate about what they do. And so that's an important part as well. And I also think that something we need to recognize is that satisfaction is important to pay attention to. If your scores for satisfaction factors are low, you really need to pay attention and get those higher. You know, we had an example of that employees who felt that their wages were not competitive, it's very hard if they're not making a living wage to get engaged at work, because so many other things are drawing at their attention and drawing from work. So pay attention to those satisfaction scores as well. I think those are very important to do.
Thank you. Another question came in while you were answering that, Michelle, about what are some of specific ways to recognize or reward employees. Do you have any specifics for that?
Well, I like to say that make it as personal as possible. You know, one of the things that is so simple, and we don't do it often enough, is a handwritten note. And to send that to not only the place of employment, but home. I remember that one year there was an organization that sent handwritten notes to the families, thanking them for the fact that they were so understanding during a crisis when their loved one who worked at the facility or the organization, had to work some overtime, and how appreciated that was by the residents. And when you get a handwritten note at home to your family, that's an example of something that's really simple to do. And I don't think we always recognize some of these really more subtle ways to recognize and reward people. And I think if we just say thank you more often, that in and of itself makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. Next question. Have you studied the relationship between employee engagement and its impact on residents?
Oh, yes. It's very, very direct. And we continue to examine the relationship between the two. But we do know this, that resident satisfaction goes way up when employee engagement is high. And you can see why. Residents really consider today many employees to be part of their extended family. And if they feel that employees aren't happy or aren't being treated well or are disgruntled, it definitely affects the resident experience. So there's a real direct correlation between the two. And if you take care of your employees well, and you can really get a lot of them in the orange zone, you'll have a lot of your residents highly satisfied. And we do resident engagement studies as well. So we want to make sure that both residents and employees are fully engaged to make that campus culture what it needs to be.
Terrific. Last question. You've collected a significant amount of data. Why do you feel benchmarking is important, and what are the strengths of the Holleran benchmarking process?
Well, I think one of the reasons to benchmark is to show your own folks how well you're doing compared to the rest of the country. You know, I think benchmarking is one of those things that's a little controversial. Some people believe it's really important. Other organizations don't believe it's as important. But I believe benchmarking is something that you should pay attention to. Not only benchmarking against our database, but benchmarking against your past results on a regular basis so that you can see whether or not the dial is moving. So benchmarking is important for a lot of different reasons, but I do think that it can really convey a sense of pride if you're doing well against the benchmark. If Maplewood Park Place would have showed you those results that they showed you earlier, Andrea, in the presentation, you wouldn't really have a sense of whether that was good or bad or otherwise. But because I showed you the national benchmark, you saw very readily how much better they were doing. And so that's something when you show employees that they have a great deal of pride about.
Yeah, I can see how it can be very impactful. Well, thank you so much. I'd like to again thank Andrea Coleman from Maplewood Park Place for her insight and best practices. Thank you, Andrea.
You're welcome.
And also thank you to Michelle Holleran for the great insights, the data, and how to actually use that data and make practical inroads into engaging it. So thank you, Michelle.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you.